So, after making a attempt at doing Disability Pride Month videos on TikTok and not realizing that they had all turned into earnest pantomimes with soft piano music, because I didn't realize that adding the background music would actually blank out the voice, I am making another attempt at an 11th hour Disability Pride Month video log using the native app on my camera, and then we'll see about posting it after I'm done. And that first attempt was a bit rambly and went through a lot of different themes, which is something that I find myself struggling with anytime there's an awareness month or a celebration month or Pride Month or Visibility Day that aligns with the community that I'm part of. But I really wanted to do a Disability Pride Month post this year and have it be meaningful, just because it's been a hard week for me as a disabled person, and disability is something that is central to my identity. These days, I identify as disabled first. I also have other identities that are very important to me: queer, non-binary, gender creative, professional, writer, all of those things. But disability, of all of the different identities that I hold, particularly of all of the different marginalized identities that I belong to communities for, disability is the one that has the biggest impact on my daily experience of life. And it is the one through which I most acutely feel systems of oppression and discrimination. And that's why this past week has been really hard, and why I, in particular right now, really want to talk about disability pride, because I think it's a concept that people outside the disability community probably get a little bit confused by. Like with other pride identities, you're talking about an identity that's systemically oppressed, claiming the space that is its own. But for most identities, that oppression is that experience is external factors. And that's true for disability too, at least as those of us within the disability community understand it. But people outside the disability community often look at disability and impairment as the same thing, and to them disability is a deficit, because they're looking at disability and impairment in the same way. So that's one of the first things that I want to talk about in terms of disability pride, is that within the disability community we often talk about the social model of disability. So my primary disability, I have several, but my primary disability, the one that has the biggest impact on my life, is multiple sclerosis. And I have been diagnosed with MS for a decade now. Living with MS for longer than that, feeling significant impact from MS for a bit shorter than that. So I was diagnosed in 2012, and I really started feeling like I had a chronic illness around 2015. And that's in part because I had a very slow start to my disease progression. So it wasn't really impacting me on a daily basis before 2015, but also in part because of internalized ableism, which was something that I really struggled with for the first few years of my disease, and still struggle with, to be honest, even a decade in. So I have been accommodating physical impairments in my life since 2015, and my disease has continued to progress over the years to the point where I've become more and more limited as time goes on. So I started out, for the first few years, I'd get flares. That's what we call acute MS symptoms when you have an active lesion. So MS is a disease where your immune system attacks your central nervous system, demyelinating the coating on your nerves. So that's the protective coating, kind of like a protective coating on an electrical wire. So the protective coating is attacked by the immune system, creating holes in that coating, which, just like if you have an exposed wire and an electrical cable, can cause short circuits in the body. When nerves are demyelinated, they tend to get interrupted and inflamed, and an acute episode is called an MS flare. So with relapsing remitting MS, when you have a flare, that's when you have an active lesion. So the lesion is demyelinated, and then as the acute episode dies down, sometimes the nerve coating will heal completely. Sometimes there will be scar tissue, and depending on the degree of the scar tissue, you may have permanent effects after a flare. And that's the primary damage that MS does within the body. And since it's acting on the central nervous system, the symptoms can be all over the charts. It's also a progressive disease, and so because of damage that has been done to the central nervous system, other systems don't talk to the brain as easily, and that means the body might move in unexpected or unfamiliar ways. You might not have your dysautonomic systems, the parts of your body that do things without you having to actively think about doing this. Things might stop working properly, and that causes other problems, and your body wears down because of that in ways that a body without MS wouldn't. So that's just kind of the simple version of my experience with my primary disability. My main impairments that impact my daily life are dynamic chronic fatigue, dynamic chronic pain, some cognitive function that goes along with cognitive fatigue, weakness in my limbs, lack of stamina, sensitivity to heat, and again, all of that varies. It's like rolling the dice every time you get out of bed. What's my experience going to be today? And there's a baseline. So like during periods of stability, it's usually pretty manageable with accommodations and coping skills that I have been able to develop for the level of impairment I'm at. That level, that baseline has changed over the years. After flares, if I've overexerted myself, if I'm going through periods of lots of stress in my life, it can go up and down over time. It's trending downward and will probably continue to trend downward. But so that's kind of how MS works. You can think of the flares like this, and then you can think of the baseline as sort of this gentler downward trending curve that's happening at the same time. And at this point in my MS journey, I have gone from, prior to my MS diagnosis, being an avid biker, backpacker, swimmer, outdoorsy person, multi-day hike, 4,000-foot mountains here in New England, to being unable to walk unassisted for more than a few yards. And when I say unassisted, that's even with a cane. I still struggle if I have to go more than, say, half a block. And depending on the day, it might not even be half a block. So for the past year, I have been reliant on my mobility scooter, Rocinante, who I purchased after my wife left me during my recuperation from one of the smallest, darkest, most hopeless, most isolated periods of my life. I got the mobility scooter probably about a month, maybe a few weeks, somewhere in the weeks to months range after my wife suddenly left me, which is for the best. And what I thought I was getting with a mobility scooter was something that would allow me to still have some independence. What I actually got with the mobility scooter was something that gave me back pieces of my life that I had completely given up hope of ever regaining. I could go out with friends and enjoy myself, and I did not expect that because I did not understand exactly how much wear and tear walking and standing and being social was putting on my body, and how much that was taking away from my experience of being able to enjoy life outside my home. So my last year without a mobility scooter corresponded with the first year of the pandemic, and I really didn't have contact with anyone other than my colleagues at work, my doctors, and my wife, who at the end of that year left me. I really didn't do anything outside my house, and the last few events that I had done outside my house prior to the pandemic, I really hadn't enjoyed. I'd gone because I wanted to be there for people that I cared about, and it was low impact stuff that I thought I could manage. But one was a trip to the Museum of Science, and I don't remember anything other than sitting on a bench in misery trying to hold myself upright. And the other was photographing Aresia, which I was in go mode for, but again, I really wasn't able to unplug from what I was doing and what I needed to do to keep my body functional enough to have any kind of experience of the event other than being behind a camera and being upright, trying to hold myself upright. So I'd given up hope of having a life outside my home when I purchased Rocinante. And when I got her, one of the first things I did was take her on a test drive. And getting her out the door was difficult. My mobility scooter, Rocinante, was 35 pounds, which is ultra light for a scooter. Very, 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 very ultra light. There's a couple in that range, and then everything else starts to get up into the 60, 70, 80 pound range. But I live in a garden level condo in my home, and so I've got a half flight of stairs up to the door and half flight back down to street level outside my door, and no way to get the scooter up and down other than over those stairs. So when I got her, I went from bodily carrying her up the stairs to trying out some temporary ramp structures to ultimately just roll clunk, roll clunk, roll clunk to get her up, and then roll clunk, roll clunk, roll clunk back down to the street to get her out, and then assembling her on the street, which Foldy pretty good at getting off and ready to go quickly. So Rocinante, the first time I took her out, I realized I could enjoy things. I was just scooting along, and because I didn't have to stand, I didn't have to walk, I was actually able to pay attention to what was happening around me. And when I started using her for trips out with friends, or to hop over to work to grab a few photos or videos for a project that I needed to do, or even to the I could go to the doctor's office without being reliant on Lyft and actually enjoy the trip there and back. I could go for walks again. And that was life-altering. I lost Rossi last week on July 23rd, 2022 at 9:12 p.m. I was coming home from the veterinarian's office, along because they're just a few miles from my house, along with medications for Sophie, who's sitting in my lap. You can't see her, and food. And as I was crossing a sort of driveway, private street off of the main street that I was traveling along for an apartment building, a driver in an SUV took a left turn out of that driveway directly into me. And this past week has been a masterclass that I did not need in the systemic and institutional side of everyday ableism. So going back to how disability pride is different from pride as I experience it with other identities, like my LGBTQ experiences as someone who is not a man or a woman, but gender creative and attracted to people across the gender spectrum. So using the words bisexual, gender creative, non-binary, queer are the words that I go to when I describe myself. The categories that I could fall in, but even though the words and definitions line up, they don't necessarily evoke the same meaning for me. Those are all things that if discrimination against the LGBTQ community wasn't a thing, wouldn't notably really impact my life. They don't notably impact my life when I'm in spaces that I consider safe. They don't impact my life in my own home, but they do impact my larger experience of the world and of being out in spaces where LGBTQI safety and rights are not protected or really prioritized. Disability and ableism impact every second of every day, no matter where I am, no matter what I'm doing, regardless of if I'm sitting at home and just trying to be functional in my own space or out in the world. I am always experiencing my ability to be in my own body through the lens of ableism. Even in my own home, the infrastructure, like the ka-chunk up and down to get to the street with the scooter, the way buildings are built is such that it assumes bodies using it have full functionality without impairment. And the way in which our society has falsely tied the idea of health and wellness to virtue. So you have to work to be healthy, you have to eat right, you have to exercise. If you're not in, if you suffer from certain health conditions, people view that as a lifestyle thing and most people view health and wellness through the lens of the ways in which people's lifestyle choices affect their health and wellness. And that's ableist as fuck. Because if you could eat your way to perfect health, I wouldn't have MS. Prior to my diagnosis, I was very careful about how I ate. I prepped most of my own food myself. I was always using fresh, whole ingredients, nothing processed or, heavy loaded with sugars and preservatives and stuff. And if exercise was something you could exercise your way to perfect health, I wouldn't have MS because I was hiking, biking, swimming, a daily practitioner of yoga, thinking about, maybe going for certification and things like that when I was first diagnosed. I still got MS. It's a lot the same with other chronic illnesses and injuries. Anyone at any point in time can become disabled through no fault of their own for no reason. And that's a very scary thing, which for people who view disability as a deficit, which is most people who haven't had to deal with it. And of course, it's a very scary thing. If you're taught that health is a virtue and that you can be in good health by doing the right things, then the idea that your health may be taken from you through no fault of your own is really scary, and it calls into question the way that you view people who aren't healthy because of things that are often associated with lifestyle choices, such as how they eat or whether or not they're exercising or not. But even the illnesses that are associated with those things, it's not a direct cause. We only perceive it as such because that's how we've been taught in an ableist society to think about health and wellness. And so chronic illness or injuries that you don't recuperate from, that are permanently disabling, are things that we don't really, relatively abled people don't really have to grapple with, and often get really uncomfortable when people who do have to grapple with those things talk about them. I've lost a lot of people from my life in the last 10 years because, why do you have to talk about that? You're such a downer. Or, well, you can't come out to parties anyway, so you just stop getting invites, you stop hearing from people. It's no big deal. The people who are still in my life, they're amazing. They're incredible. They're wonderful. The ones who are gone, it's okay. Made more room for the other ones who wanted to stick around. So being disabled often gets kind of lonely, especially at first when you're losing people, and it changes your life goals. It changes how you see yourself. It forces you to kind of either always be miserable or unpack these assumptions that you've had about health and wellness as virtues, and what healing really means, and whether or not healing is even a reasonable goal for most people. It certainly isn't for me. Like, my body is just going to keep getting worse and worse. We have a hashtag in the chronic illness community on Twitter called NES Void, that stands for no end in sight void, because if you're living with a degenerative, chronic, incurable disease, then, first you have to get through the grieving process of coming to terms with that. And then after that, you have to find something that keeps you going that isn't getting better. Because unlike those old school commercials of "it gets better" for LGBTQ kids, which is absolutely true, and you should believe that, for the chronic illness community, "it gets better" is instead, "it doesn't get better," but we cope better. We cope better. We deprogram from internalized ableism. We learn how to value ourselves for and to look for people who value us for things other than health and wellness. And we adapt to life plans and goals that meet what we're capable of doing as people with physical or mental or emotional or cognitive limitations in a society that doesn't really acknowledge that those things are common and require accommodation, and yeah, and that they can happen to anyone at any age. I was diagnosed with MS at 30. I was probably living with it for 5 or 6 years before that. Some people are diagnosed in childhood. Some people are diagnosed late in life. The older you get, the more likely you are to have other disabled people around your age in your life, because more and more of the population joins us as we get older, and we're in the middle of a pandemic that is debilitating a lot of people. So there are also a lot of people right now who are just coming to terms with stuff that the chronic illness community has been dealing with for long before I was alive, definitely. And everybody has their own newcomer process, but right now there's an influx of a bunch of people who are newcomers to, oh wait, I'm not gonna get better. This is awful. What now? And I remember going through that myself. I wasn't really able to think of myself as disabled for the first few years of my disability. Even once I was able to think of myself as disabled, I still had a lot of shame around that, and I felt like I needed to put time and effort into things that would theoretically protect me from becoming more disabled, so that I could keep up with relatively abled people around me. The shitty thing is that, for me at least, and for a lot of people in the chronic illness community, like that internalized ableism new to chronic illness and disability period of time is very dangerous, because pushing yourself like that actually hurts you. For dynamic fatigue disorders and chronic pain disorders, particularly anything that is a disorder of a system of the body, overexertion can permanently limit your baseline. And in an ableist society, as you're getting used to your living with a disability, and you're exiting a culture where everything is fix it with diet and exercise, you're not actually aware of that. Nobody tells you you can't exercise the way that you did before chronic illness entered your life, because if you do that, you're going to potentially hurt yourself and be worse off permanently going forward. So I did that. I many times before I finally learned better, overexerted myself, and then didn't quite understand why my disease was progressing instead of getting better, which is what society and people with a mindset from living relatively able lives, and even some of my doctors, were telling me. So, hey, long COVID peeps, if you're seeing this, and anyone else who's like new to chronic illness, you probably won't hear this from anybody but other disabled people. But the idea that you can exercise your way out of a baseline change is not only false, it is opposite of the truth. And if you push yourself too hard, you may actually lower your baseline faster and more permanently than if you had slowed down and taken the rest that you really needed. So take it with a grain of salt anytime anybody tells you to exercise. But we're half an hour into this video, and I still haven't talked about what I really wanted to talk about for Disability Pride Month, which is what's happened to Rossi and the fallout from that over the last week of my life. So Rocinante, my mobility scooter, has become an integral part of my life. She let me be a person again in a very real way when I got her. She's allowed me to run my own errands. She's allowed me to pick back up with a social life. She gave me a sense of freedom because she was always just sitting in the corner, plugged in, ready to go if I needed her. And well, I still didn't get out as much as I wanted to or would have if I didn't have to ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk her up and down, have a flight of stairs to get out the door. When I really needed to or wanted to, she was always there. And that opened up a lot of possibilities that I would not have without a powered mobility device, because I can use a cane. I have many canes. I can use a cane, but it's really only good over a very short distance. Even my rollator may extend my range to around the block, but it's not going to get me much further than that. Rossi could get me all the way down to Back Bay or the Common and home on a single charge. So when I say she gave me back my ability to walk, she really did. And Saturday, I was using her to run an errand, an urgent errand. It was hot. It had been 96 degrees most of the day, and since I also suffer from heat sensitivity with MS, I had waited until the temperature started to drop around sundown before I left the house so that I could go down and pick up her medications, Sophie's medications, because she was out of her wet food, and she is also chronically ill, poor kitten, kidneys. So she was out of wet food and hadn't had any wet food, which meant that the medication that gets mixed into it wasn't in her system anymore. And I really knew that she couldn't wait until the next time I could have a friend run the errand for me. So I needed to go out, and Rossi was there, and we did the ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk up and down, and went all the way down to Angel, and we're most of the way home with the cat food successfully acquired when I was crossing that intersection between the street that I was coming down and the apartment complex private road driveway thing parking lot. And this black SUV, I reached for the section of sidewalk that I was on. I was in the street because there's no curb cut at the opening of the driveway that the guy was pulling out of. So I always route around that and drive right next to the edge of the side curb in the street, because going ka-tunk, tunk over a sidewalk into a street without a curb cut hurts a lot when you're on a mobility scooter with no shocks. Because if you've got an ultralight scooter, there's just no shocks. So I route around things like that, just like I route around garbage cans or places where I know the pavement is very uneven. And Rossi is a speedy little scooter. She caps out at 8 miles per hour under ideal conditions on flat pavement. That's the fastest she is capable of moving. And if you're a semi-enthusiastic jogger or an 8-year-old running after a ball, you could outpace me on the scooter. She's also a looker. She doesn't look like most mobility scooters, so she often would get compliments as I was out and about on my day, and people would ask me where I got her and be surprised when I said 1-800-wheelchairs.com and things like that. So she doesn't have the classic disability scooter look that you see with the kinds of devices that are often associated with mobility. But she's a mobility scooter. I purchased her on 1-800.com. She's made by a company out of the UK called eFoldy. She was designed for people with mobility issues, by people with mobility issues. And I consider her part of my body. Or did. It's hard. And legally, she's a medical device. So I was crossing this intersection and this guy was pulling up, and I'm careful around cars. I sit about the height of maybe an 8-9-year-old when I'm on the scooter, so I'm lower than a person on a bicycle or a pedestrian most pedestrians my age would be. So I saw him pulling up and I started to slow and then stop, and then he stopped, and I was already in the intersection when he reached his first stopping point. He was making a left turn from that private way onto an actual road, and I was already in the intersection crossing over that private way when he reached it. So he stopped and I slowly went forward. He started rolling again. I stopped. He stopped. I waited a few seconds because sometimes cars do that even if they don't see you. He didn't start moving again. I thought he had decided to cede the legal right of way to me because I did technically have as a pedestrian already in the intersection, I had the right of way. Police report says that he didn't see me. We'll get more into that in a bit. This is going to be a long video. So there was. Stopped. He was stopped. I'd waited to see if he was going to move. He didn't move. I proceeded across the intersection. As I was crossing in front of his car, I had crossed the driver's side of the car and was moving across the passenger side of the car when he started to make his left turn. And I wasn't that far out from him because he was already at the edge of the intersection, so I had only gone a little bit. I had to modify my route to go around the front of his car, so I was pretty close to the car. I did not have any time to react when his wheels started moving. I realized the car was moving and it was on top of me at about the same time. Rossi, fortunately for me, rolled as soon as we were hit, and she partially threw me at an angle that got most of my body out from the path of the vehicle. My left leg was stuck on the brake lever on the handlebar, the pant leg of my leg, and so my left leg was trapped under the wheel of the vehicle with Rocinante as the left passenger side wheel of the SUV rolled over her and crushed us. My leg didn't break. I think that's because she didn't. I had puncture wounds, have puncture wounds and lacerations on the left side of my body, particularly around the ankle of my left leg. There's a very deep puncture wound that has been a pain in the ass to deal with this past week. I wasn't able to free myself right away because my pant leg was stuck to her brake lever. I was on the pavement under the car, pretty disoriented right after it happened, and things happened very, very quickly because there was a state officer within sight of the accident when it happened. An ambulance arrived very soon thereafter, and then the police were there. So I only had a little bit of time between when I was hit and went down and when I was being strapped to the stretcher and loaded onto the ambulance. In that time, after I got through my initial panic and yelling for someone to call 911, the first thing I did as a disabled person was think about what I needed to do to keep myself safe. Because I know, both from experience and from being engaged in disability justice work and active in the disability community, that as a disabled person in an accident like that, a medical crisis, I'm not necessarily going to be treated the same way that an able-bodied person in my position would be. And even as a non-disabled person, as somebody who is like gender creative with bright, funky hair and not necessarily looking like your average 40-year-old professional, that I might not be treated the same way as somebody who looked more the part of a professional, serious adult on an errand would be. So medical crisis in public and how to handle it has been something I've thought about a lot as particularly living alone since Claire left. And so I already had some rough safety plan idea, crisis response stuff that kicked in because I've thought about it enough that that's what happened. So I knew that I really wanted to make sure that somebody knew where I was. I knew if I was going to be taken away to a hospital that I would likely have my phone taken from me as they were doing what they needed to do, and that I might not be able to get it back until much, 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 much later. And so first thing I did was grab my phone and text the last person I had been talking to that I had just been hit by a car so that somebody would know what had happened. I couldn't get more out than that before the EMTs got to me, and sure enough, then I didn't have my phone. But the fact that I had just sent a message to somebody that I had just been hit by a car gave me a reason to tell the EMTs that they needed to give me my phone, because all my friend knows is I've been hit by a car. If I don't send a follow-up text, my friend is going to be confused and panicked. I need to tell them where I'm at and the condition I'm in so that they're not left wondering, having just gotten a message that only says, I've just been hit by a car. So the EMTs gave me my phone much sooner than I might have otherwise gotten it, because I had that reason for needing it. And I've been denied in medical crisis before. I've been denied access to my cell phone to even just be able to tell someone where I am and what's happening. So this worked. It also meant that since they had given me my phone once, it was easier for me to keep asking for them to give it back between texts, because they couldn't just say it was a policy to not give me a phone. They had already given me my phone, which is the experience I've had in other situations where this has happened, where I wanted to send a message to someone, but I hadn't already initiated contact, and they've been like, well, you'll get it back at the hospital, or you'll get back, it's our policy, you can't have it, type thing. So that gave me a lifeline to someone who wasn't a stranger and knew where I was and what had happened, and that I was able to establish two-way communication with much sooner than I might otherwise have been. I also started just going through what had happened and everything I thought the emergency responders needed to know every time I saw a new face. I was hit by a car. I didn't go up on the windshield. I went under the wheel. Because I heard it over and over again. They were up on the windshield. They were up on the, no, I was never on the windshield. I was never on the hood. Stop saying I was on the windshield. I wasn't on the windshield. I wasn't on the hood. I was under the wheel. And I have MS. Did they tell you I have MS? What's that medication you're putting in me? I have multiple sclerosis. No, I can't tell you how much pain I'm in. I have multiple sclerosis. The left half of my body is numb. Did they tell you I have MS? When I got to the hospital, nobody told anybody I had MS. I had to inform my doctors as though it was the first time, every single time they handed me off between people. And I was coming home from the vet. I have medication that my cat urgently needs in that bag. I need you to make sure that you get me my cat's medication from that bag as soon as possible, because the bag was trapped on the back of the scooter under the car. So they weren't going to bring my scooter with me to the hospital. They needed a tow truck to get it out. They weren't going to give me my belongings from that. I had no idea how long it was going to be before I would get my belongings if they didn't have a reason to give them to me. So like putting the urgency there again, like I have a sick cat at home, I need this, and that also like establishes the reason for my trip. Great, because shenanigans happened later. Disability pride, yo. Oh God, I don't even know what symbols I'm throwing. It's late. This is a long video already. I hope you're not super bored. Probably everybody has stopped watching by this point. But we're getting to the really good stuff. And by good stuff, I mean really shitty stuff. Like being in the back of an ambulance strapped to a bodyboard and your clothes have just been cut off, and that's when the responding officer decides to come in and ask you for your statement. I had 2 opportunities to give the police my statement. That was the first one. In the ambulance, my clothes have just been cut off of my body. I am still lying exposed on the table. And the officer shows up in the door and starts asking me questions about what I was doing when the accident happened. The other time I had the opportunity to talk to the officer was while I was at the hospital, when he brought my belongings back. And I was between tests, and I had the opportunity to give my statement. Well, I was still in a state of trauma, and under other circumstances would have probably been on pain medications. But another thing I did as a disabled person was deny pain medications, because I knew that I am already several strikes against me being able to have autonomy and decisions that are made about me in this circumstance. Funky hair, disabled, genderqueer, number of strikes. So MS with stress can have cognitive impacts such as brain fog, aphasia, cognitive slowing, executive dysfunction. So adding pain medication on top of that was going to be a lot. So I had consistently declined pain medication that normally you'd expect someone to be on after their leg was run over by a car. So I wasn't on pain medication when the cop talked to me, but he had no way of knowing that. And those were the only 2 times that I had the opportunity to tell my story to the police. Meanwhile, the driver got to talk to the police and give the first canon version of events that the report was going to be based on. So I'm dealing with medical nonsense in a state of trauma, and the police are taking a report from the guy who just ran over me. And they don't issue a citation. they list me as a person on an electric scooter instead of a disabled pedestrian on a mobility device. Two very different things in the eye of the law. Again, mobility device is considered medical equipment. It is considered part of a disabled person's body. A disabled person using a mobility device, powered or unpowered, is considered a pedestrian in the eyes of the law. A person, a non-disabled person on a scooter, is not a pedestrian. And an electric scooter, unless it's being used by a disabled person, is not a mobility device. So the incident report did not indicate that I was disabled, despite the fact that I had said to the officer, I'm disabled, and I had used the words mobility scooter to describe what I was using. It was not included. Well, there was one place it was included in the initial report, and every other place that it was referred to, it was electric scooter, bicycle, electric tricycle, electric bicycle, small electric bicycle. One place it was listed as a mobility scooter, and one place it indicated that I had said that I was disabled. So, driver claimed he did not see me. Now, I'm going to remind you of what's happening. I am coming up the street on the same side of the street that the driver is making his left turn out of. I was already in the intersection when he reached the intersection. I stopped when I saw him. He stopped. He had tinted glass, and it was 9:12 at night, so I don't know if he saw me or not. I can't see through the glass. I do know for certain it was a man because the police report did include that information. Police report included a lot of information about the guy, but not his insurance information. That's a whole thing that's coming to later. So, he says he didn't see me. And he was making a left turn. He would have had to look directly at me. Legally is what you're supposed to do when making a left turn out of a smaller road, driveway, private way, what have you, onto a larger thoroughfare. So you're making a left turn. I am approaching from your left, right next to the curb in the street, already in the intersection. You stop, roll twice, and he's saying he didn't see me. And the police report also didn't include my direction of travel, even though I gave the officer specific details about where I had been coming from, where I was going to, which side of the road I was on, and the direction of my travel. It also didn't include what I said about, like, noticing that he had stopped and continuing forward, and then noticing that he was going forward again and stopping, and then noticing that he had stopped a second time and waiting a few seconds to be sure that he really had stopped this time before I proceeded in front of his car, or that I was directly in front of his car when his wheels started moving to make the left turn and ran over me. So, no way of knowing what else the driver said to the officer. I certainly was in no condition to ask the driver myself for any information, such as his insurance information or how to get a hold of his policy to make a claim. When I got to the hospital, they gave me paperwork and said the police report would include the insurance information, which is also what I had heard from the EMTs and what I had heard from everybody up to the point where I was sent home from the hospital. When I reached out to the precinct where I needed to, when I reached out for the report and got the report, it didn't include the insurance information. So I called the main office. They said I had to get it from the precinct. I called the precinct and was told, oh, we don't collect that information and we can't give you that. We're not going to give you, we can't give you that. We don't have it. We can't give it to you. I have confirmed from reliable sources this is a bald-faced lie. So that was my first call to the precinct, at which point I tried to find other ways of getting it, because they told me, oh, call your own insurance. Well, problem. Pedestrian. Don't own a car. Gave up my auto insurance when I stopped driving. So I don't have an auto insurance company to go through. I'm just little old me. Oh, well, if you don't have your auto insurance, try the hospital. So I did. I called the hospital on the number that they had given me on the piece of paper where I was supposed to write down the driver's insurance information so I'd have it to read it back to them when I called them. I called them and told them that the police wouldn't give me the information. And they told me that they couldn't get it, or that they weren't going to go and get it. So they suggested I call my health insurance, which I did. And my health insurance was like, we can't do anything about this. If there's a health claim, then yeah, we can act on it. But if the hospital isn't billing until they get his insurance information, then we don't have a claim, then we can't do anything about it. And by then, I talked to people who were more familiar with the law than I was, who were like, no, the police are supposed to include the driver's insurance as a standard thing that they do in incident reports after an auto accident. So I called the precinct again. Escalated up to a supervisor after I was told that I wasn't going to be given this information. Wound up calling them 3 different times and talking to 3 different people. I also requested my report be amended, and part of the information was fixed, part of it was not. I tried going through the R&V. I tried getting in touch with Internal Affairs, where I actually then did get the name of the insurance company, but still didn't have a policy number or the full name of the policyholder. So when I called the insurance company, even though I had the license plate number, the VIN, the name of the driver, because I didn't have the full name of the policyholder or the policy number, his insurance wouldn't let me file a claim. And as a last resort, I asked my mom to call the phone number that was listed for the guy in the incident report and ask him directly. She left a voicemail. His wife called back the next day, refused to give my mom the insurance information, said my insurance could get the information from them, or I could speak to their lawyer. Also pumped my mom for a lot of personal information. So just a shout out to anybody who's still watching at this point. If somebody asks you information about someone who is not you and you don't have explicit consent to share that information, don't do it. Because my mom shared sensitive information that these people had no business knowing under the circumstances. Facts of my diagnosis, details about how my disability limits my life, stuff that's protected by HIPAA, that them not knowing knowing or not knowing makes a difference in how stuff folds out, either through regular channels or through legal channels, which is the route that I ended up going after exhausting all other options for trying to get the guy's insurance information on my own without having to wait for Internal Affairs and the auto investigator who was on vacation to get back to me, on the promise that I would then be able to discuss my options that didn't include, we're going to give you the claim information. So I did end up hiring a lawyer. At that point, I am very, very fortunate that I have the resources, stability, and support to have spent a week chasing down every other possible avenue of trying to make a claim before taking legal action, and then be able to take legal action. When I was younger and less resourced, I would not have been able to make it that far in the process, and I probably would not have been confident enough to have decided to pursue a legal case on my own. And there are a lot of people in the disabilities community and in other with other non-auto using identities who are far less resourced, supported, and capable of navigating a complex system like this than I am. I came to this already fairly literate about my rights and the law and the avenues of support that were available to me. I knew that I could reach out to internal affairs. I knew that I could reach out to my elected officials. I knew that I could contact the Office of Disability. And I knew that I was entitled to this information. So when the cops were repeatedly refusing to give it to me, I knew that that was not how this was supposed to go, despite what they were saying. All of those gave me the foundation that I needed to effectively self-advocate for myself, and then make the decision to hire someone to advocate for me when my ability to exercise my rights as a private citizen was exhausted. Because as a private citizen, I can't run a plate. So it didn't matter that I had his plate and VIN number. But a law office can. A law office can also more easily get information out of the police and the RMV than a private citizen can. So if I didn't know what I know, I wouldn't have known that I was being lied to. If I didn't know what I know, I wouldn't have known that legally I'm a pedestrian, and legally that gives me a higher level of protection than the way the police incident report was written was offering me by not including that information. Because a person on a mobility scooter is a vehicle user, not a pedestrian, or not a person on a person on an electric recreational scooter is a vehicle user, a user of a vehicle that goes under, well, there's different tiers. I think they start at 15 miles an hour and go up to 25, versus a mobility aid user is a pedestrian. My mobility device is not a vehicle in the eyes of the law. And if they'd listed me as a pedestrian, they would have written the guy a citation. Since they didn't list me as a pedestrian, they also did not indicate fault or liability, which is its own thing, because Massachusetts is a no-fault state. So even if you're determined to be at fault, you still are supposed to be able to get in touch with the other person's insurance information and your own to get coverage. They didn't issue a citation for the guy who hit me. No consequences for running over a disabled pedestrian. They tried to tell me that they didn't know if my mobility scooter would legally be considered a mobility scooter. which is bullshit. And then they, you know, denied me information that I needed to file a claim without hiring someone to do it for me. Good job. Good job. Way to... And also, if I was able-bodied, I wouldn't have had a problem going over that curb, and I wouldn't have needed to be in the street in the first place. So, yeah. But with Rossi out of commission, Rocinante, my mobility scooter, not that I'd be going many places right now with an open wound on my leg after getting sent home from the ER experience was its own thing. But with Rossi out of commission, and it took me, I think, 3 or 4 weeks for delivery on my first order. And I've been a week without her now, and it's not sure when I'm going to be financially ready to replace her, or whether... So my timeline on getting a replacement is up in the air, and in the meantime, I am effectively back to being homebound, because my ability to function outside of my home is much more severely limited than it was while I had Rosie. Plus I've got open wounds on my bodies. So that's the legal side of the ableist shenanigans. And even if the process has gone perfectly, it would still be a headache. But the process that I experienced was incredibly frustrating, time-consuming, a lot of work, a lot of calls, ate up a lot of energy, and ten years ago, when I was first diagnosed, I'd have probably given up. Probably wouldn't have understood what my rights were. It hurts me to think about how many people in my community probably either give up because they don't know their rights, or because it's just too much. And so it's easier to take the loss. I mean, I've made that on some decisions too. And I think that's what the people like the person who hit me and the officers who declined to release the information that I needed to make a claim to me were hoping. Because that's probably what their experience has been, is that most of the time making it so difficult for somebody who doesn't have a need for auto insurance and wasn't in an insured vehicle to file a claim, making it too difficult to be worthwhile, probably works 99% of the time. So that's part of my disability pride, is that now that I have the resources and the wherewithal and the knowledge to be able to stick this fight out as long as I need to, I'm going to. Because nobody should have to go through this. And if we don't stick these fights out, then they're gonna keep doing this shit to the people who can't put up a fight. All my little crypt peeps. If you're able-bodied, do not use that word. That's our word. It's from one of us to another. Like, but yeah. Those of you who can use the word, you know who you are. All my little crypt peeps. Crypt the vote. We each fight the fight in the way that we're able to at the time that we can. And I love you all. And I hate how much the system forces us to be resilient and then objectifies us for it. And I know so many of you are not as privileged as I am for various reasons, be it lack of resources, inability to keep a job, and being forced into poverty as a result, not having the energy, not having the knowledge or functional ability to act on that knowledge and stick it out and jump through all the bullshit hoops. Lots of stuff. This video is getting over an hour long, and I haven't even really had a chance to talk about the ableism that I experienced in the ER on the 2 trips that I've taken. But I don't want to drone on all night. This video is already long. I'm already tired. If any of you are still watching, I'm sure you're tired too. So I just want to close this out, tying it back to the larger theme of Disability Pride Month and why Disability Pride, which is a relatively new thing, like the first Disability Pride only happened in 1990. Why it has only really started like blowing up as an international thing over the last few years, and why it's so important. Because ableism is baked into every aspect of how we think and talk about health and wellness. From the way they've talked about precautions during the pandemic, literally writing disabled lives off at the end of the sentence. Well, the good news is that only the elderly and disabled are dying, from extremely high-positioned public health policymakers to when we talk about disabled people dying, saying at least their suffering is over. Don't ever say that about me after I pass. I may have MS. I'm not suffering. I have daily pain and dynamic fatigue and the physical limitations to my body and the symptoms of my disease are a lot to deal with, but I also have a really excellent life. And that's despite ableism. And because I'm fortunate to have the resources that I have. But anybody with a disability can have a really nice life if they are accommodated and supported. The suffering that people are escaping when they die isn't because they have a chronic illness. It's because society is ableist. When you say that about a disabled person who has just passed, you are diminishing the value of their life. I saw that today about somebody who passed recently, and it just makes me so angry, because I know when relatively healthy people say it, they're thinking of disease as something that you need to escape. Well, fuck you. I have a normal lifespan ahead of me. And I have a mother who told me she expected me to die before she does because of ableism. disability is something that happens outside the body. My chronic illness has caused me to have symptoms and impairments that need to be treated and accommodated. Infrastructure, policies, and social norms that erase the needs of bodies like mine and make it difficult for us to get treatment, support, and accommodation are what disable me. I am not prevented from going into a multi-level building by my body. I am prevented from going into a multi-level building if there is no ramp or lift to provide an alternative to stairs. I am not prevented from going outside my home and engaging in public life by my body. I am prevented from going outside my home and engaging in public life because I no longer have the powered mobility device that I rely on as an alternative to functional legs. Disability. The part of disability that is the real struggle and the real debilitating piece of it comes from external, institutional, systemic sources. So when you say that by dying, a disabled person has escaped their suffering, you're completely misunderstanding the source of that suffering. It's the social aspects of ableism that kill and cause us to struggle. Some people, it's the disease. But for most of us, it's not our bodies. So please, just scratch the idea that disability itself is a form of suffering from your brain. Expunge it. And understand that once we come to terms with the fact that we're not going to get better or heal, once we discard those myths that people who haven't had to go through that are so bought into, we still live rich lives. We still have mighty goals. We can still have amazing community and huge ambitions and lots going for us, as long as we have the support and accommodation that we need to provide access and care for the ways in which our bodies are different from what society considers the healthy norm. Disability pride is, for me, about still having that joy in life and also carrying the complex mess and pain of my chronic illness and the deep anger at a society that makes it so much harder than it needs for me to live an independent and self-determined life. And the continual grief, both for the things that I've lost to my physical condition and the things that I have lost because society will not accommodate me in being able to maintain my participation in those things. and that all of that can exist at the same time for me and other disabled people. Like, it's not all bad. It's not all good. A lot of my life is a hell of a lot better than it ever was when I considered myself able-bodied. And I'm also dealing with 24/7 continual dynamic pain, fatigue, and other symptoms associated with my incurable degenerative disease. But I'm here, and I'm not planning on going anywhere. And to quote my MS icon from MS Confidential, Elizabeth Jameson, I have never been more ambitious, and my world has never been bigger. My addendum to what Elizabeth has said after hearing her say that. Now, Elizabeth's a bit older than I am and further along in disease progression, and she has a way fancier mobility device than I do that has all kinds of bells and whistles that I will probably need someday. I hope to wake up feeling that way every day for the rest of my life. And I don't expect anything about my body to be a hindrance in that. As long as I have the accommodations, treatment, and support that I need to take care of my body as my disease progresses and my needs change, there's no reason that I can't wake up every day feeling like I've never been more ambitious and my world has never been bigger. I've always had big goals. And the moment I heard somebody so much further along in their journey of chronic illness progression say those words, I realized that's something we should all have. We should all have the level of support that allows us to continue growing as we gain more experience, just like people living without chronic illness do. I love you, Rocinante. You saved my life the day you rolled into it, and you saved it again when you rolled me out of the way of danger on your last functional day. Oh, my love, thank you for saving my life. And to all you other beautiful, chronically ill, crippled fools just trying to get by in a world that doesn't seem to want us or want to make space for us, I love you too, my community. You also save my life every day, and I am so grateful that I know so many people who are in this fight to make sure that we don't get shunted off to the side and denied the ability to be people because we're sick and not getting better. Because not being able to heal should not be a reason that society gives up on you. But I think a lot of us know in very personal and very painful ways that that's not how things are right now.